for tonight. But we're going to talk about, drum roll please, hardships. Okay, so it is my understanding that y'all have been going through a series called When the Going Gets Tough, or rather rough. I'm not sure which one. But that's what we're going to talk about. But before we do that, I have a question, a series of questions actually, and I'm doing a poll. Okay, so this is a raise your hand. All right, here it is. Raise your hand if you are alive right now. Okay, everyone, and if you're not raising your hand, I'm very concerned for you. That's actually a massive problem. But by and large, everyone's alive right now. Now, here's my next question, okay? Raise your hand if you have been through something difficult in life. Okay, so if you don't notice, basically everyone that is alive raised their hand when I asked if they've been through something difficult. So there's this correlation between being alive and being in a broken world that causes these difficulties. And my 1-year-old is in the back. Her name is Jane. She's super cool. Yeah, I just heard her. But she's 1 year old, okay? And if she was sentient, she would have raised her hand. So right now she's teething. And if y'all don't know what that is, it is when bones shoot through your gums and they become your teeth. And it's actually really painful. She cries a lot for no reason, and we give her some baby medication, and sometimes that doesn't help. She loses sleep over it, so it's really hard on her. It's really hard on us as the parents having to juggle that. By the way, I recommend kids. It's actually a lot of fun. But get a spouse first. Get married first. So everyone that's alive has gone through something hard. There are several different reasons why we go through hard things. Some of y'all may have gone through something hard because you didn't check Rate My Professor. Oh, yeah, all too familiar, okay? You sign up for a class and you think it's going to be great until you open the syllabus, and you're like, dang, why didn't I check the reviews? So that's a very, very common thing. I actually had that this past semester. I'm doing a school online, and I was like, biblical interpretations, that looks great. Sign up for it. Day one rolls around, I open my syllabus, and I was like, well, it's been a good 26 years. This is how it ends. I got to call my wife. I'm not going to make it out. But lo and behold, I've made it out. So sometimes we go through hardships by academics. But on a more serious note, sometimes we go through hardships because of our sin. Okay, maybe we make a bad decision that topples the rest of our lives, or we say something to someone, do something to someone, we're caught in some addiction, and it lights the fuse that blows up in our face. It's like we're holding the bomb, and we did it to ourselves. And that's very real, and I'm sure as I said that, maybe you've thought of a certain situation. But sometimes we go through hardships because of someone else's sin. Okay, so maybe you come from a broken home, your parents got involved, and something happened, and now they're divorced, and you were caught in the crossfire, and it hurts, and it brings a lot of difficulty. Okay, maybe you were bullied, that hurts. Maybe someone said something to you when you were younger, or did something to you when you were younger, and it wounded you, and it brought hardship. Okay, so there are tons of reasons why we go through hardships, but there's one in particular I want to talk about tonight. The reason we go through hardships sometimes is literally for no reason. Stuff just happens. Okay, and so I'm calling this sermon, if you will, Ruin Without Reason. It's like the bomb blows up and you did nothing wrong. No one else did anything wrong. It just happened. Life happened. Okay, so we're gonna look in the Bible at a guy that had that happen to him. But I do want to share a story from my own life, from my wife's life, about how ruin hit us for literally no reason. We were married for 2 years, so this was 3 years ago. It was September 6, 2018. We were married for 2 years. We have been out of college for 4 months, so we're freshmen at life. Okay, and my wife was teaching in Toller Elementary School about 30 minutes away from here. I was working in Dublin at my church, and so our morning routine would be wake up, eat breakfast, drink coffee, and she would go to work, and I would go to Beans and Frank's to spend my time with God, and then I would head to work. So standard morning, it's raining really hard, but we like the rain, so it was actually a very pleasant breakfast. And I go to Beans and Frank's, crack open my Bible, do my quiet time, and it's 7:40. So I start to pack up my stuff. I'm trying to get to work by 8, and I get a phone call. And I was like, okay, I don't recognize this number, but it's weird. Someone's calling this early. So here's how the call went. Hello? Hey, Daniel, this is Miss Carey. I'm the principal at Toller Elementary School. I'm Jordan's boss. Hey, Miss Carey, how's it going? And then she said, I'm just calling to see if Jordan's okay. I was like, yeah, she should be there about 8 o'clock, so she's doing great. Oh, they didn't call you? I was like, what do you mean? And she said, Daniel, Jordan got in a serious car wreck. And the EMTs called me because they pulled her out of her vehicle in a ditch, knocked out, and they saw her lanyard on her chest, so they knew to call Toller Elementary School. And I talked to him. Ruin without reason, okay? It happens. You get the phone call. So I rush to Stephenville Hospital. She's there. I walk in. She's knocked out. She's got grass everywhere, soaking wet. She hydroplaned into a ditch. It's more like a ravine, okay, not a ditch. It's really bad. Covered in glass, all this stuff. So they ship us up to Fort Worth to Harris Methodist Hospital, and up there they did all the tests, all the x-rays, and they found out that she broke her hips, her pelvis, in 3 spots. And she broke a part of her back. And she broke her neck. And she popped both of her lungs. She got a concussion. So she was ravaged, man. Like, it was bad. She had a neck brace for 3 months. She was in a wheelchair. It hurt her to breathe, which sucks because you have to breathe to stay alive. So she was constantly in pain. And man, it was hard. It did something to me. My relationship with God. Lord behold, she's completely healed. She's in the back. Catch her after 4:02. Yes, thank you. Woo! She's a baller. Also, I recommend marriage. It's great. But that happened to me. You may have similar stories of that happening to you. Maybe not as dramatic, maybe more dramatic. I don't know. But life happens. And the question is, how do we deal with it? What do we do? So there's actually a guy in the Bible who had a very, very hard thing happen. He got the phone call, if you will. And it's his reason without ruin. So we're going to be in Job. Some of y'all are like, yes, Job. Okay, so several things about Job as you're flipping there. Job is a long book. It's 42 chapters. And by and large, it's actually a poem. It's very, very well written. But since it's so big, we're going to read the beginning. I'm going to summarize the middle, and then we'll read the end for the sake of time. Things to need to know. Job was a very upright man. God called him a man of great integrity. He loved the Lord, he followed the Lord, and God said, I agree, he does that. The other thing, Job was filthy rich. I mean, this dude was loaded. And if back then they didn't count money, they actually counted assets. So when they said he had all these camels, all these livestock, all this acreage, all these children, that's saying he's filthy rich because they don't have all that money. This was a very, very long time ago. So read about it. The other thing, Job's wife was a little crazy. We'll read about that here in a second. So Job 1, verses 6 through 22. And this is his story. One day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord asked Satan, where have you come from? From roaming through the earth, Satan answered him, and walking around on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil. Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. Very well, the Lord said to Satan. Everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and reported, while the oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazed nearby, the Sabeans swooped down and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, God's fire fell from heaven. It burned the sheep and the servants and devoured them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The messenger was still speaking when yet another came and reported that the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, made a raid on the camels, and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and reported, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on the young people so that they died, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head. He fell to the ground and worshipped, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Okay, so the story actually doesn't end. For the sake of time, I'll fill in the blanks. So he's like, blessed be the name of the Lord. Dang it, this sucks, but hey, God is still good, and that's a paraphrase. But then Satan strolls into God's courtroom. He says, hey, if he didn't have his health, he would denounce you. And God's like, okay, you took everything else, and he stayed upright. I'll let you take his health, but don't kill him. And so the story continues. Oh, yes, we'll read that part. I won't paraphrase that. But he enters the courtroom again and then comes out, and we're in Job chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. And here's how it plays out. So Satan left the Lord's presence and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself while he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. You speak as a foolish woman speaks, he told her. Should we accept only good from God and not the adversity? Through all of this, Job did not sin in what he said. Okay, so that's the first part. We see Job respond in a really spectacular way. Okay, he had the phone call moment back to back to back, and then he ended up very, very ill. So the first thing he says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. So what he's doing is he's acknowledging God's sovereignty and God's generosity. Hey, God gave me my kids. God gave me my camel. He gave me my land. He gave me all of this wealth, and he gave it to me, and he takes it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And so he's saying, God's sovereign. He's generous. This is my lot, and I'll roll with it. And then the next thing happens, he gets ill, and then he says, should we accept the good things from God and not the adversity? He actually recognizes that, hey, God allows adversity. He allows good, he causes good, but he allows adversity. So that's his immediate response. It's pretty good. It's like, dang, man, I would have freaked out. But you see his wife. Curse God and die. So that's extreme, but I get it. Okay, those were her kids too. Those were her camels. Those were her servants, her land, everything. So everything was stripped from her but her health. So I understand she's a little worked up. But there was kind of this how dare God attitude. How dare you? How dare you take my stuff? And she also had this attitude of God owes me. Curse God and die because he owed me and now he has not come through and I'm done. Curse him. He's dead to me. So that's what's going on with her. Okay? Also a reasonable response. I'm not going to lie. So we can't really falter too much, I don't think. But then we get Job's long-term response. And I'm going to summarize this part. The next 30-ish chapters, 35, is a conversation between Job and his friends. And his friends were morons, most of them. They gave him terrible advice. And so they're arguing back and forth. But what we see Job's response in chapter 2 versus the rest of chapter 2, I'll roll with that. He goes silent for a week straight. And then as soon as he opens his mouth, he says, I wish I was dead. In fact, I wish I would have died in my mother's womb. Okay, so he got depressed. I mean, rightfully so. So he responded very well at first, but as time went on, the dark night of the soul began to creep in. And depression followed. And this type of self-loathing, crap, I wish I was dead too type thought was coming on him. Has anyone been there? Okay. We know what it's like to be there. To some degree. Okay, we know what it's like to slip into depression because of something happened. And then his friends start giving him terrible advice, but starts out really well, gets depressed, and then in chapter 27, don't turn there, but you can look at it later, he basically accuses God. He's like, you don't know how to run the universe, okay? Because here's the deal. I've lived upright, and you're cursing me. What are you doing? So he questions God's authority and says, how dare you? You don't know what you're doing. I've lived so right, and now you've let this happen to me. Okay, has anyone been there? I mean, maybe we wouldn't say it out loud, but I think that may have been the posture of our hearts at one point in time. And I'll be real, that was my response with Jordan. We're serving God faithfully, and now she's almost dead. What are you doing? Like, you owe me. And I didn't say it out loud, but that was the posture of my heart. And then, chapters 29, he actually demands an answer from God. You owe me. What are you doing? Come talk to me. So he demands from God Almighty, okay? But here's what's interesting. God responds, all right? Be careful what you ask for. And I think Job learned that. But here's the thing about what God says. He's asking, why me, why me, why me? And God never gave him a straight answer. God never said, here's why. He says, here's who I am. So we're going to read the last part of Job. It's going to be Job 38, 1 through 7. So picture this. Job's arguing with his friends. They're talking. It's kind of heated. And then boom, this happens. Verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. He said, who is this who obscures my counsel with ignorant words? Get ready to answer me like a man. When I question you, you will inform me. Where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who fixed its dimensions? Certainly you know that. Who stretched a measuring line across it? What supports its foundation, or who laid its cornerstone? Well, while the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Okay, so God goes on for another 2 chapters, and his point is, listen, man, I'm going to confront you. You better have an answer. You're demanding an answer from me. I'm going to demand an answer from you. And by the way, he shows up in a whirlwind. They're big chilling, talking, arguing, tornado, and there's God. That would freak me out, that alone. But he confronts him, and he basically says, you're ignorant. Who is this that questions my counsel? He says, you don't know what you're talking about. Are you really going to question me and tell me I'm doing it wrong? And then he starts bragging on creation. Okay, we read 7 verses, but for 2 chapters he's saying, hey, where were you when I did this? Where were you when I laid the foundations? Can you tell me how the stars work? Can you tell me how the wind blows, how the sea goes? And he's bragging on everything he's done to let Job know, hey, you're ignorant and I'm God. I know how to run the universe. And so he's making this point to actually humble Job, and Job needed it. Now, in chapter 40, I'll summarize this. Job actually speaks. God chews him out for 2 chapters, and then Job says, oh my gosh, I am an idiot. I'm ignorant. Sorry, I should not have said anything. So he basically apologizes, and he recognizes, hey, I don't know what I'm talking about. And then God says, wait a second, I'm not done. We're going to keep talking. I demand an answer from you, Job. Tell me. And then he goes on about creation some more. And it's really interesting. I encourage y'all to read it, what God says about it. And then we're going to close with this verse. It's Job 42, 1 through 6. This is Job's final response to what God said after 4 chapters of just proving how dumb Job is. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me. You said, listen now, and I will speak. When I question you, you will inform me. I had heard reports about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I reject my words, and I am sorry for them. I am but dust and ashes. So he goes, you're right. I should not have said that. I messed up. But I've only heard about you, but now you've appeared to me and I've seen you. So he sees God in a different way because of his trial, because of this ruin without reason. And we're going to get into that here in a second. But the way the story ends is God actually restores everything twofold. God says, okay, you've repented. Here's twice as many kids. Here's twice as many cattle, twice as much land, twice as much property. He doubles up what Job lost. And here's what's crazy. I'll make this point and move on. His wife got double too. And his wife had a crappy attitude. But God blessed her because God's good. Okay, you're not going to be smited if you kind of react a little rough. Okay? I would be dead if God smited me every time I gave him an attitude, okay? But she gets everything restored as well. So, what can we learn from God? What can we learn about God? God allows hardships, okay? Thinking back to the first part, Satan literally couldn't do anything unless God said, you're approved. You do it. Okay, so that actually creates some tension. Well, if God allows bad things to happen, is God actually good? Okay, but here's what we see. God allows hardships, but he contains hardships. And here's what happened in Job. Hey, Job's going to curse you if you take his stuff. God said, take his stuff, but don't take his health. So he contains it. And then the next scene, hey, Job's going to curse you if I take his health. And God says, take his health, but don't kill him. So God contains it. Okay, and here's where I was at with Jordan's wreck. God, are you good because you almost killed my wife? Or rather, you let her almost die. Whatever happened, we knew it was allowed. But here's the thing. God contained it. Because you know what? She's not dead. She's alive. She has no complications. And everyone that saw her scans and saw the picture of the car in the wreck thought she should have been dead. Okay, there's could have been dead and should have been dead. She should have been dead. Okay, so her neck broke. And your vertebrae's like this. And there's your nerve cord, whatever y'all nursing majors call it, that's in the hole. When your neck breaks and you die, it does this. It cuts the cord. When your neck breaks and you survive, it goes out. It spares the cord. And her break went out. So God's hand literally contained the bone that protected her. So God allowed the wreck, but God contained it. And she's still alive. So we need to know that about the Lord. He's not evil. He contains these things, and he lets us go through suffering for good reasons. And the other thing we can learn about God is things work out. Okay, Job's life worked out. Now, he got filthy, even more filthy rich. I'm not saying if you follow God, you'll be rich, but I am saying there's a light at the end of the tunnel because God's good. Jordan's well. That sucked, man. I would not wish that on anyone, what happened to us and what happened to her. But she's well. God restores the things that he even allows to happen, and he contains these circumstances. The next thing we see about God, and the final thing, is these trials and hardships actually refine our view of God. And here's what Job says. I have heard reports of you, but now my eyes have seen you. He doesn't waste suffering. God never wastes suffering. Okay, we see God in one way, something happens, and God meets us there, and it's like we see him differently. My view of God changed during the wreck, maybe a little unfavorably, but coming out on hindsight, my view of God was elevated. I saw him more clear. And man, my wife also grew a lot from it. It was really hard on her, but God really refined her. And it's the same with Job. I hate that this happened, but man, I have a different perspective. So I want to close with this. A question. I want you to think about it. What is your view on God? Okay, maybe you're in here and you don't believe in God. Disbelief in God is actually a view of God. Okay, so everyone views God in some way. So do you think God's evil? Well, if God's good, why are there bad things? If there are bad things, God must be evil. Okay, that's a legit question. All right, don't fret for thinking that and asking that. Do you think God doesn't exist? It's a reasonable question to ask. Or are you indifferent towards God? Or is God indifferent towards you? Yeah, I made him, I made her, set the universe in motion, but I'm hands off. I'm going to go play some Xbox, drink some peace tea while they do their thing, okay? Maybe that's your view. God doesn't really care, but he's there. Or do you think maybe God's wronged you? Kind of like Job's response, this accusatory response towards God. Something happened, God did this, I'm out, you've wronged me, you're dead to me. Okay, that may be your response. But I want to tell you what God views you, or God's view is of himself. So the Bible describes God as loving. It says he is love. When we think of God, that's his essence, and that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. God's got a heart for you. He thinks about you. He smiles when you wake up, even if you hate him. He cherishes you as you're breathing the air that he's letting you breathe, even if you want nothing to do with him. But here's the deal, y'all. God is love, but God's also just. He's the just judge of the universe, and he cannot let sin go unpunished. Just like if a judge cleared a murderer for literally no reason, is that judge actually good? That judge should be fired, man. So we all have this innate sense of justice, and God's got it too. We actually have it because God has it. We're made in his image, so that's part of us. Now, since God's just and God's loving, and we deserve death, okay, for our sin, eternal separation from God in hell, that's what we all deserve. But God says, hey, someone's got to die, and I love them. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send my son down to earth and die in their spot, essentially taking their hell and all the punishment they deserve so that they can have a relationship with me. And so, we're sinful, God's just, Jesus dies for us, and we don't deserve it. And then we get to have this relationship with God. And that is available to you today because God loves you and his justice has been satisfied. So, if that's the first time you've heard that, it's called the gospel. If there's something in you that just clicked, okay, it's like, dang, that hit different. Or it's like there's a cord in you being plucked, a cord that you didn't even know was there. It's called God giving you faith to believe. That's God saving you. That's God replacing your punishment in hell with Jesus' death on the cross so you can be with him. He's pursuing you. So the question is, what do you do about it? You respond. You say yes to that. And so if you've got this plucking in your heart and maybe it makes sense for the first time, talk to someone. Don't leave this room without letting someone know, hey, I think God's stirring something. There's something going on in me. That's God saving you. And by the way, if you don't respond tonight, he's going to keep pursuing you. He'll do that. So you can wait the next 10 years to respond, or you can do that today, tonight. So talk to the friend you came with. Heck, talk to me. I'll be around after. Talk to Megan. Talk to the BSM staff. Talk to the folks in the back because he loves you. Band, if y'all want to come up, we're going to close with that. But just remember, God contains your hardships. He allows them, but he contains them. And God loves you, and he died on the cross for your sins, and you can have that relationship.
Thank you for watching this video from the Tarleton BSM. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below or contact us at www.tarletonbsm.com. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Tarleton BSM.